Talitha Kum is a network of Catholic sisters working in 90 countries to end human trafficking. An estimated 50,000 people are victims of trafficking each year, mostly women and children. In 2020, the Talitha Kum network reached over 185,000 people, but more is needed. To end trafficking once
Test, test, test. Okay, testing. Hello and welcome everybody. I think we're ready to start. Thank you everybody here for joining us at the headquarters of the International Union of Superiors General and also online. My name is Carol Glatz. I'm a correspondent for Catholic News Services Rome Bureau. Most of today's event will be in English. If people need a translation, there are headsets in the back. Anyone following online, you can go to the UISG YouTube channel to get different streams in different languages. For anyone tweeting, the hashtag for today's launch is Care Against Trafficking. And we'll be trying to keep to a tight schedule. So with talks going no more than 9 minutes. So please do not be offended by the bell at 8 minutes. That means you have 1 minute left. Okay. So today we're marking the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And we're here to launch Talitha Kum's call to action under this banner, Care Against Trafficking. This event brings together representatives of the Talitha Kum networks from around the world, the team here at the UISG, partners from the Global Solidarity Fund, representatives from the Holy See and its embassies, and supporters from non-governmental and intergovernmental organizations. I'd like to turn the floor over now to have our today's welcome from Claretian missionary Sister Jolanta Kafka. She's president of the Women's International Union of Superiors General, and she's our host for today. Thank you.
Si sente, sì. Buonasera, parlerò in italiano.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to speak in Italian. Good evening, everyone. Everyone here and everyone online through our various platforms. And welcome to everyone listening to us towards the end of the meeting. Thank you for being part of this meeting for today. A special thanks to His Eminence Pietro Parolin, Secretary of State, whose presence we really welcome as a sign of his personal love towards the most vulnerable, towards our most committed path of the Church towards the service of humans, but also as a sign of the care of the Church and of Pope Francis, who accompanies us in our path of solidarity and of concrete signs. I would like to mention to everyone here, our ambassadors, the representatives of international coordination of Talitha Kum, has many people collaborating along the path of Talitha Kum, and especially over this last stage, elaborating the call for action of Talitha Kum. Marta Guglielmetti, our staff of Global Solidarity Fund, Maria Grazia Giammariano, Teresa Albano, Silvia Scarpa, Giulia Cirillo, and most surely, on behalf of Talitha Kum, Sister Gabriella and Sister Pat, who is the Executive Secretary of UISG and who also accompanied the path. This is a celebration of a fruit of a great work, but also a fruit which will turn into a seed. Jesus, and I remembered it this morning, says that the kingdom of God is like a small seed which once planted, even if the smallest in the world, it grows, it flourishes, and it becomes a tree where even birds can find shelter. And in this way, we can also analyze the growth of Talitha Kum. Talitha Kum has been growing in the International Union of Superior Generals as a fruit of the assembly and as a prophetical decision to commit for people victims of trafficking. It was actually born with secrecy and discretion, same as it is true for all the things of God. And today we bear witness to the fruits of the activity of listening to the victims and to the sisters' commitment to their protection as consecrated women working in the church and in society. And they were able to create and build bridges involving other people in their commitment. At the very basis of our project, we always had the direct contact with victims at the very root of our project. But already in that assembly in September 2019, we actually understood that we need also a structural and institutional commitment to protect and defend human rights and end human trafficking, this plague of the humankind. It's already been more than 10 years of collaboration with Talitacom, and the network of Talitacom expanded in more than 90 countries, and this is a miracle. Sister Gabriella Bottani, a Comboni missionary who has been accompanying this path for more than 7 years, can bear witness of what does it mean to welcome this willingness to be committed in favor of the most marginalized people. Pope Francis said in one of the international conferences concerning human trafficking that trafficking is not only a violation of freedom and human dignity, but it is also a crime against humanity because it actually stains the humankind. This is why compassion and accompaniment are not enough. It is not enough to be side by side with victims, but we need a more effective commitment, a high-level commitment in order to prevent human trafficking, a political commitment, a social commitment. And so, little by little, this project was developed, even including advocacy. And today, we also want to bear witness to the starting point of a new willingness. Our network invites us to provide legal services to victims of migration, not applying the clause of crime to those who are victims and who could also newly become as people without documents, people considered as criminals. We need to preserve their right to be protected in the place where they are. We need to develop new strategies. And we need also to really speak about this problem as a problem affecting all. We also need to promote the sense of dignity, which actually involves everyone and stands at the very basis of our vocation to life that we were given by God. And so, we, and I think it's true to say we as superior generals, as UISG, and we as Talitacom, we, everyone here today, want to raise this cry and say we need to be committed, as we also said almost 1 month ago in our executive board meeting in UISG, when we approved this call for action, when we also want to commit ourselves and we want to involve in this commitment everyone. And we want to do it today, just today, as we were saying before, because today is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and we are here today to accompany one another. And so thank you, because you are the very sign of the accompaniment on which we can count. So thank you, and thank you for your support.
Thank you, Sister Yolanta. And now we're going to hear from our first speaker today, Cardinal Pietro Parolin. He's Secretary of State of the Holy See. Thank you, Your Eminence. It's an honor to have you.
Excellencies, honorable and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to begin by thanking both Sister Yolanta, President of the Unione Internazionale delle Superiore Generali, and Sister Gabriella, International Coordinator for the UISG of Talitha Cum, for their kind invitation to be present with you today and to deliver a few opening remarks. As you know, both women religious and religious orders have a long history of answering Christ's call to serve, responding to the scourge of slavery and human trafficking to prayer, sacrifice, and the concrete pursuit of mercy, justice, and hope. However, it was in the late 1990s that the intuition of coming together with one mission and one voice led to the creation of Talitha Cum. The fruits of this labor are many. One of them is the impressive network of Catholic sisters and the community of allies and friends that has matured around them. As its membership grows, so does the universal reach of this mission to support victims, survivors, and other people at risk. Today marks another important step in this journey. The document before us is a call to action, not only to Talitha Cum's traditional membership, but to all people of goodwill. This includes those of different faith traditions, governments, and the international community. Today, I would encourage Talitha Cum to consider the mission that inspired this call to action as a mission to carry the good news of our faith out into the world. Christ Jesus has broken the bonds of slavery. He has truly saved man from sin and death. Your experience of redemption, restoration, justice, mercy, and hope is for everyone. Indeed, by now, we are all familiar with the story of Jairus' daughter, the young girl that Christ called back to life from death, and from which Talitha Cum gets its powerful name and inspiration. We have many similar stories in our Christian tradition and history for people saved through their encounter with Christ, particularly in the Bible. Today, I would like to consider two such stories and the way in which they help us to understand better what the Church means when it speaks of its prophetic voice, including in its response to modern slavery. I will start with the Old Testament story of Joseph, sold by his brothers into slavery in Egypt, and then the story of Mary Magdalene, apostle to the apostles. Let us begin with Joseph. We know that Joseph was the preferred son of his father Jacob, and that Jacob's brothers, jealous of this preference, sold him into slavery. However, what is most striking about this story is that all along his journey as prisoner and slave, Joseph never lost hope or faith in the Lord. Joseph was betrayed by his brothers and was mistreated by his master. He was slandered, imprisoned, and forgotten for the Pharaoh. But the Lord never abandoned him, and perhaps more importantly, Joseph never abandoned the Lord. In fact, Joseph's relationship with God, his experience of faith and trust allowed him to do the unthinkable. He forgave the very people that sold him into slavery. Joseph, even after becoming the most powerful man in Egypt, with the power to condemn his brother to death, chose mercy. What could have moved him to look on these captors with this impossible gaze? Only the experience of God's mercy is in his own life. Our ability to look at those that offend us and to seek justice, but not at the expense of mercy, speaks to the prophetic voice of the Church. In other words, what is otherwise impossible becomes possible through our encounter with God. Like Joseph, Mary of Magdala also encountered the eyes of a loving father and brother. While it is not certain that she was the prostitute identified in the Gospel of John, tradition tells us that it was likely then that Christ first looked at Mary Magdalene and defended her dignity as he would his own child, his very sister. His gaze on Mary that day not only changed her heart, not only affirmed her in all of her dignity, but it also changed the heart of the man that would have cast the first stone. At that very moment, when Mary repented from her sin, she was not alone. Many of the men who had likely looked upon her with lust, who perhaps even abused her, changed their hearts and repented as well, recognizing in front of Christ that they too were sinners in need of mercy. Mary Magdalene became the apostle of the apostles, the first to proclaim to them the good news of Christ's resurrection, because she herself had seen the resurrection and already been restored by him to new life. This very message, which has been experienced by so many victims and survivors through the advocacy and care of Talitha Cum, must be made known to the world. It is the heart of the prophetic voice of the Church. It is also the prophetic voice of all of those with whom they work and share their vocation of service. Talitha Cum can attest that the impossible is possible because, like Joseph and Mary Magdalene, they have seen it with their own eyes and touched it with their own hands. We speak often of the prophetic voice of the Church and of the unique contribution that we, the people of God, have to offer to the world. However, where does this voice come from? I believe these stories show that it comes from our relationship with God. It comes from the experience of discovering ourselves to be loved and never abandoned, of being worthy of the dignity that was always ours. This is also, I also believe, should form the strength and the sure foundation of the call to action, informing its appeal to care, to heal, to empower, and to restore. As is already reflected within the introductory note of the call to action, your work is grounded in the belief that the dignity of the oppressed and exploited can be restored through sororal and fraternal relationship, marked by the presence of the Holy Spirit and the mysterious encounter with God. In a relationship between equals, sisters walk together with victims along the path of healing as they regain a deep awareness of their inner values as members of their family and communities. In this manner, Talitha Kum addresses the systemic causes that leave people at risk of falling into the hands of trafficking networks, engaging families and local communities together with key stakeholders at the national and international level. It seems to me that this summarizes very succinctly the unique contribution and proposal that the network of Talitha Kum hopes to offer through its call to action. It is a prophetic voice that the world rightfully needs to hear. If heeded, it will bring necessary change to the way in which the international community, including at the local level, responds to the scourge of modern slavery. Here, I would like to end with the words of Pope Francis, and I quote, "It seems that many do not want to understand the extent of the problem. There are some who, directly involved in criminal organization, do not want it to be talked about, simply because they earn high profits as a result of the new form of slavery. There are also some who, despite knowing about the problem, do not want to talk because they are there where the chain of consumption ends, as a consumer of the services offered by men, women, and children who have been turned into slaves. We cannot become distracted. We are all called to leave behind any form of hypocrisy, facing the reality that we are part of the problem. The problem is not in the opposite lane. It involves us. We are not permitted to look elsewhere and declare our ignorance or our innocence. May this call to action shake the conscience of the complacent and encourage those that would otherwise look the other way to join you, your community, and your allies in your tireless effort to break the bonds of sin and slavery. May the world's encounter with you become their encounter with Christ, just like for Joseph and Mary Magdalene, one heart at a time. Thank you very much for your listening.
Thank you, Cardinal. I know the Holy See's support and advocacy is really important for all the local efforts of the Church on the ground. Next, we're delighted to be joined by the former Special Rapporteur on Trafficking in Persons at the United Nations, Maria Grazia Giammarinaro. She will set the context for this call to action against the broader backdrop of what international efforts are going on to combat trafficking.
Thank you very much for your kind invitation. It's really a privilege for me to be here today in this day against violence against women. I've been asked to speak about the international context of the care against trafficking and Talitha Kum's action. I decided, of course, there are many possible ways to talk about the international context, but I decided to choose to speak from the side of exploited women and to talk about their vulnerabilities and their causes. Migrants and women migrants in particular are vulnerable to violence, trafficking, and exploitation, not because they are weak, but rather because of their subordinate position in patriarchal hierarchies, and because of the male pretense to control women's bodies and women's lives. This imbalance of power causes women's vulnerability to violence and exploitation and trafficking as to any other forms of gender-based violence. Women's vulnerabilities are thus mostly situational, contextual. In countries of origin, people are vulnerable when they are affected by extreme poverty, including lack of essential resources deriving from climate change and desertification. Women in particular have less access to natural and cultural resources, and in many countries cannot inherit the land. This causes a lack of means of subsistence, which induces many women to migrate in unsafe conditions. In conflict situations, people are targeted in different ways to increase the military power of one of the parties, including through the kidnapping and the use of boys and girls as combatants, or in logistics and conditions of servitude as cooks or waitresses or sexual slaves. Women are particularly targeted. Systemic rape has been frequently used as a weapon of war to humiliate the enemy and show the power of those who are, at least at the moment, the winners. In addition, ISIS-Daesh tactics include enslaving women to reward fighters and or selling them in the market of sexual exploitation to finance armed groups. Such atrocities trigger the so-called cycle of violence, as women as other people trying to escape conflict situations are often trapped in abusive relationships which result in further violence and severe exploitation. In particular, women suffering rape or sexual slavery during conflict and trying to escape have been very often found afterwards in situations of sexual exploitation. When people decide to escape from their countries, the travel itself exposes them to violence, abuse, and exploitation, as facilitators often ask for more money. In their desperate research of money, migrants are subject to violence, extortion, torture, rape, exploitation, and enslavement. And information about what happens on a daily basis in Libya is a horrible description of what people bear while they are trapped there, trying to live for European countries. Women in particular are kept in connection houses, in which they are subjected to any form of violence and exploitation until traffickers decide to send them, very often pregnant, toward their destiny on unsafe boats. Many migrants, women, men, and children died during their perilous journey in the desert or at sea. The last sinking happened yesterday in the English Channel, in which 27 people at least lost their lives. To them go our thoughts. For survivors, another painful stage of their Odyssey starts. Very often migrants, in order to continue their journey, are obliged to contract a debt with their smugglers and thus are obliged to work for them till they manage to pay off such a debt. At this stage, migrants are totally at the mercy of exploiters. In fact, traffickers decide what kind of work a man or a woman must perform, where, in what conditions of work, where they have to live, and how much they have to pay for accommodation, food, water, and transports. Regarding women, traffickers decide, according to their own interests, if they will be sold into prostitution or will be exploited at work, especially agriculture or domestic work, in condition of servitude, as it happens to women sent to Gulf countries, especially. Irregularity of the residence status is an important vulnerability factor. Recruitment is one of the worst criminal links of the chain leading to severe exploitation. And at work, exploitation itself exacerbates vulnerabilities. In addition, discrimination along racial, ethnic, and gender lines is a recurrent component of exploitation, so that we can talk about situational and intersectional vulnerabilities to violence and exploitation. In addition, as far as women are concerned, labor exploitation is very often coupled with sexual violence, abuse, and harassment. Sexual exploitation remains one of the worst forms of exploitation, sometimes destroying the sense of personal identity and dignity. Although not only women are subject to sexual exploitation, not only women are subject to sexual exploitation, women and girls are the vast majority of people sexually exploited. Particular attention should be paid to vulnerabilities related to gender identity. LGBTQI persons, especially transgender, are particularly targeted for sexual exploitation. Finally, vulnerability can be a consequence of trafficking in person. Exploited people are systematically stigmatized when they return home for becoming a burden for their families and communities, and this situation can result in retrafficking. This shocking landscape can hardly describe the human suffering implied by trafficking, violence, and severe exploitation. As it happened at the time of historical slavery, a social, political, and also ethical engagement is needed. Be it faith-based or inherent to secular values, valuing human freedom and dignity. Before concluding, let me say a few words on Talitha Kum's call to action. In my previous capacity, I had the privilege to cooperate with Talitha Kum, and I have always appreciated and admired your compassionate, non-judgmental, and effective approach based on a word and a practice I value and love, sorority. To care is an important word for all women. In the traditional division of work, social reproduction is the sphere assigned to women. However, this destiny designed by patriarchal social norms has become for women a source of inspiration, competence, and ethical positioning. In the context of trafficking in persons, when victims and people at risk understand that someone is really caring for them, regardless of whether they have been humiliated and violated, not for personal interest, but exclusively for the sake of the victim, suddenly everything changes. Care opens a transformative path for both the parties, the one giving and the one receiving care. In this respect, the action of consecrated women can and actually does make the difference because of its authenticity and credibility. Healing is an important part of what we usually do in the context of family or friend relationships when the person we care for has been hit and wounded. When we take care of a trafficked person, we know that healing is the first action leading to recovery. To heal means in some cases helping the person to forget momentarily, and then later to accept the truth and to talk about their experience. To empower victims by amplifying their voices is a way to make it possible that they are heard. This is not to be taken for granted. To be heard by authorities, for example, means to be listened to without any misunderstanding. And we know that very often authorities just hear what they want to hear. And when a person does not adhere to what they consider a worthy victim, suddenly a victim's voice is silenced. To make victims' voices be heard means to make visible the diversity of victims' experiences and to enable people to understand that there are no worthy and unworthy victims, but people whose rights, bodies, and souls have been violated and thus deserve restoration. I conclude by saying that to restore human dignity by promoting access to justice, when someone is in a position to understand that he or she has rights and that such rights can be acknowledged and protected through a judicial procedure, this means that the person concerned is not anymore a victim, but a citizen. This is thus an important step toward full social inclusion of survivors. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for that, giving us the point of view of victims and what makes them vulnerable. We'd like to introduce now what the Talitha Kum Network is proposing, this idea of taking their already critical work as sisters on the ground to the next level. I'd like to welcome the international coordinator of Talitha Kum, Kamboni Sister Gabriella Botani. Sister Gabriella.
Buongiorno. Oggi è la giornata
Good
mondiale
morning, everyone. Today is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and we decided to present Talitha Kum's call to action today in order to denounce the increase in every form of violence against girls and women, physical, psychological, economic, and spiritual violence, which wounds the dignity of women. It hurts the dignity of human beings. Among the consequences of the pandemics, we know that violence has been increasing, actually disproportionately damaging women and girls all over the world. Presenting the call to action today means stating strongly that trafficking means violence and an expression of violent relationships based on discrimination and exploitation. At the same time, we want to acknowledge that human trafficking doesn't only victimize women and children, but growingly men, and as Maria Grazia was saying, even LGBTQI groups, so very wide groups. Talitha Kum's call to action has been developed during the pandemics. After the first shock, which hit us all, Talitha Kum's networks try to effectively live the proximity with people in situations of vulnerability, in situations of exploitation and trafficking. We tried to find new ways to reach out to victims in order to continue healing paths, in order to heal their wounds due to violence, and to pursue the path of social and working inclusion. We listened to and participated in the traumas of so many people who were so many and whose trauma were so huge that they were not able to ask for help. This pandemics really worsened the whole situation of human trafficking, and for many people and for the victims of human trafficking, the situation became unbearable. The stop of pandemics really connected us all to the fragility of our times, supporting one another in keeping hope alive through simple gestures of solidarity. We listened with tears in our eyes and indignance in our heart, the words of the Pope to keep sensitive. Our call to action was born in that context, based on what we heard, what we saw, and what our heart felt, and what our hands touched. It is a call to action, again, an advocacy sign, which in the Latin root vocare recalls the term vocation. It is a call which is strengthened by the pain of the victims, as it happened with Moses and with the burning bush. The call to action addresses everyone, not only sisters, and I want to thank Jolanta Kafka, our leaders, for having welcomed the request to join us. I want to thank the Catholic Church, His Eminence. Thank you for being here today. For us, it's very important to know that we are a church. I would like to thank the representatives of the church, but also the leaders of other religions and other faiths, particularly, I would like to thank Religions for Peace, which will be present today with the message of Dr. Azakaram, who couldn't be here in person. We would like also to talk to non-believer, to all people of goodwill who share with us the vision of a world free from human trafficking and free from exploitation. And many of you, I know, are part of this commitment. I will not call the names because otherwise I will hear the bell ringing. This call to action particularly wants to reach out to the global governance representatives. We always talked, and today we want to ask nations and international organizations to commit more and together in order to contrast altogether human trafficking and supporting victims and survivors. I would like to thank the various ambassadors who always accompany our path and are today with us, as well as the intergovernmental organizations here. Thank you. Our documents is composed of 3 parts and can be integrally found. Today, you just received the central part. On the website of Talitacum, you will have the integral part. The first part involves the spirit, the strength that we have. We define ourselves an international network against human trafficking and human exploitation. The central part on which we want to work today is the call to action, inspired by 4 important verbs. I will tell them in English because we wrote the original in English. Care. Care for the victims of human trafficking and exploitation and for people at risk. Heal. Heal physical, psychosocial, and spiritual wounds. Empower. Empower victims and survivors, as well as individuals at risk, by amplifying their voices. Restore. Restore human dignity by promoting access to justice. Then we have various actions that my fellow sisters will soon read for you. Our document continues with an invitation to join in a common prayer for action because it is fundamental for us. And particularly, we invite you to join us on February the 8th in the International Day of Prayer Against Human Trafficking. And for the next February 8th, we will concentrate on the strength and the power of care, which we learned is so important in this period. The last part of the document lists the international norms relevant to the work of Talitacum. The actions proposed by the call to action are rooted in evangelical vows, in the social doctrine of the Church. We choose to be side by side with those who are in the darkness of social vulnerability, of oppression and exploitation, standing against every form of imbalances, both political, social, economic, and cultural discriminations, without discriminating and not letting anyone behind. Care, heal, empower, and restore. They go beyond actions. They are lifestyles involving individuals, communities, social spheres, and even the nature, because human trafficking and every form of exploitation will end only if we transform our individual behaviors and collective behaviors by taking concrete action to eliminate the roots of this phenomenon, but also supporting the individuals and the communities which have been suffering the most due to the consequences of the environments and human exploitation. We want to provide opportunities for liberation and social inclusion.
Thank you, Sister Gabriela, for explaining what victims are facing and why a launch for greater action is needed. For people, you can find this call on the network's website, which is talithakum.info. Now we'd like to show how widespread and united this network is, and we'd like to present a video showcasing some of the many sisters active in the global Talitha Kum network.
Sometimes I feel that we focus on the effects of trafficking. We focus on the faces that human trafficking shows us every day, on the abuse, human rights. However, we don't focus on the causes. So I think that this world of shadows in the back must be illuminated with concrete, direct action, where resources and projects must be focused on transforming this reality and even reaching the most impoverished populations. Here in Ecuador, we find people who have been overlooked by the government or by international aid, and they are those who now suffer the worst violence and the highest incidence of exploitation.
We annually make the trip to Canberra and install ourselves in Parliament House for a week and meet with parliamentarians and raise issues of concern about human trafficking. One of the issues that has been on our agenda for about 6 years has been the exploitation of 22 men from Vanuatu, Pacific Island, who are brought to Australia as workers, and they were exploited dreadfully and not paid. Now, just this week, not only have they got their payments, but there's been a decision made at a federal level that all agricultural workers must be paid a basic living wage. So advocacy continues, and it will continue.
Pienso que es muy importante el trabajo colaborativo, de colaboración entre los diferentes entes.
I think collaborative work is very important. Collaboration between different organizations, governmental, civil society, NGOs, etc. And we've made progress on this. For example, in Peru, we have been working hard on the issue of migrants because the situation of migration renders people vulnerable to human trafficking. So we have been coordinating with UNHCR, with IOM, and with other institutions, joining forces, pooling our resources in order to provide a response. And as the Pope says, it's a question of working together in the fight against human trafficking. It's very hard to create programs of welcome, and considering even respect at the borders, when our society are so frightened. We have been frightened of difference. Yes, they say she's been trafficking, but who knows if she's actually in prostitution or if she chooses it. And yes, they come for our jobs. There aren't enough for us. A series of arguments that really are promoted by governments and even by the media. And so I do think that we need to work hard on the issue of awareness, even in organizations and governance, to achieve more fraternal societies to achieve societies along the lines the Pope describes in his last encyclical, to build an ever wider we. We are speaking up from different parts of the world. There are many aspects of this phenomenon that are shared and some are more specific, but I think that at least in Italy, we are now faced with challenges that are really intimidating because we are unprepared. And I think that the great sin from which we struggle to redeem ourselves, and not just when it comes to trafficking, is that we chase after emergencies, but we actually don't prevent them. Or we build things that may be excellent, but respond to immediate needs, and then become a burden to maintain because they lack that flexibility, which later makes them possible to change. So we are at a time where someone says that we need to radically reorganize the way we work to combat trafficking.
We have 10 years of war. We didn't finish the war. The media finished the war actually, but we didn't finish the war. 10 years of suffering. Later on, in some part of Syria, still the war continued, but in some part, okay, concerning the bombs stopped, but concerning the economic crisis still is increasing day by day. And pandemic came, paralyzed also the life of the people. Many people without a job, many people without income. So you can imagine the life of the people. And if we will talk about human trafficking, we need to know about the economic situation of the area. And it's not easy, it's very difficult. People really are starving. So all what we are doing now as this group, we're trying to help women at least to find food on their table, you know, to support them little by little, to have some of their dignity, to know that they still can let us say, not function, can work, can do something good for their families.
In my work with people at risk of human trafficking, especially children and some young women, the value of care is very meaningful, because when I care for them, I'm telling them that we, you and me, are sister, brother. We belong to one family, one Father, one God, and we are equal. Therefore, we love each other. We care for each other. Therefore, care signifies with love, and care has the same meaning with love of God and love of neighbor. This is the rule, the golden rule of the gospel.
I think that video really sets a good idea of these sisters on the ground helping individuals and communities, and the need for international cooperation, national policies, larger action to get at the root causes. We'd like to thank all of our speakers who helped set the context for us here. And also thanks to Leah Beltrami and her team who created this video that we just saw. We're moving on now to the second part of today's launch. We're going to explore some of the substance of the call. We're going to get a sense of each point of concern from a member of the Talitha Kum Coordination Committee and also from a representative of a supporting organization. Also a reminder, if people following online, you can listen to different language streams on the UISG YouTube channel. Speaking first, we'll have Maryknoll's sister, Abby Avellino. She's Talitha Kum's coordinator for Asia. She's here with us on the panel, and she'll be followed by a recorded message by Ambassador Pietro Sebastiani. He's Italy's ambassador to the Holy See, who unfortunately was not able to join us today in person. All right, thank you, Sister Abby.
Thank you. Ensuring access to justice and long-term state-supported psychosocial and health assistance, as well as the work and residence permits for victims in destination countries. Victims are the first in need of rehabilitation and reintegration in society. All of society is called to grow in this awareness, especially with regard to national and international legislation, in order to be able to ensure that traffickers be brought to justice and their unjust earnings redirected to for the rehabilitations of victims. Moreover, to be recognized as a victim is hard work. When assisting victims and dealing with bureaucratic legal procedures, sisters are usually confronted with a stumbling block of proving that trafficked persons are not guilty of other crimes, such as violating immigration laws, labor laws, family laws, or other criminal codes provisions. In addition, victims usually have to prove that as trafficked person, they did not consent to their exploitation, which can often be challenging. Talitha Kum believes that victims should be treated with compassion as well as full respect and recognition of their dignity. To this end, the network calls in particular on global governance stakeholders for the provision of state-supported legal services to trafficked persons and appropriate measures to guarantee their safety and the safety of those assisting them. The application of the non-punishment clause to presume and to de facto victims for crimes committed as a consequence or in the course of being trafficked. 4, the compensation of damages. 4, access to effective long-term state-supported psychosocial and health assistance, as well as residence and employment permits and opportunities as key for victims to regain self-worth, confidence, self-esteem, and thus avoid revictimization. Traffic-centered investigation and prosecution strategies, including challenging environments such as the World Wide Web and social media, and the use of new tools such as cryptocurrencies. 4, the promotion of well-tailored forms of procedural, restorative, and transitional justice that guarantee the healing process of victims and survivors. Thus, in Asia, we are committed and are trying our best to attend to the needs of victims and survivors in accessing services such as shelter, health services, legal assistance, emotional support, and basic needs. More so now, because of the economic instability in many countries in Asia brought by the pandemic, many people are at risk and vulnerable for trafficking, especially women, children, and migrants. The number of cases of exploitation and potential victims of trafficking has increased during this time of pandemic. We believe that everyone has a role to play in ensuring access to justice for victims and survivors.
I would like to thank Sisters and Network of Teletacom for their effortless fight against human trafficking worldwide and for having invited me to take part in this important campaign. I'd like to thank particular Sister Bottani, who I have known for many years and have been admiring ever since. And with her, we organize many events here in Palazzo Borromeo, the seat of the Embassy of Italy to the Holy See, the last of which some months ago in May. It's crucial to raise global public awareness on the plague of human trafficking and to decisively tackle it, for it is, to quote the Holy Father, an open wound on the body of contemporary society. This plague affects at least 40 million people, 10 million of which are children. This plague involves dark trades, illegal adoptions, sale of human organs, illegal and humiliating work in the industrial and agricultural sector, in tourism, on ships, or even in our very houses. Because this phenomenon involves in some ways both developing and developed countries. The pandemics actually worsened the situation, moving child sexual exploitation from the streets to people's homes or online platforms. Initiatives counteracting human trafficking shall first and foremost embrace a victim-centered approach based on the undeniable dignity of every human being. Furthermore, the links between transnational organized crime, terrorism, and human trafficking networks must be addressed. Over the last few years, the crime of human trafficking in this part of the world has been also linked to the migratory flows between Africa and Europe. The related juridical framework is provided by the Protocol to Prevent, Suppress and Punish Trafficking in Persons, especially women and children, referring to the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, also known as Palermo Convention. The fight against human trafficking is a priority of Italy's foreign policies and multilateralism. This is the reason why we funded many UN projects aimed at strengthening judicial cooperation and at providing increasing assistance to victims. There are also many other examples of Italy's willingness to cooperate. For example, I had the opportunity of leading Italy's Department for Development Cooperation and working as an ambassador in UN agencies to Italy. I know, and we know, that public cooperation alone is not enough. We need to focus on multidisciplinary approaches involving many stakeholders in synergy, both in the public and private sector. Human trafficking is a multifaceted phenomenon with a global dimension, and therefore it needs to be tackled by a strong multilateral system. To stop and prevent human trafficking, the international community must take coordinated and effective action together with supranational organizations, nations, civil society, and institutions. To this end, I'd like to draw your attention on the Italian best practice of humanitarian corridors, which has become the most advanced at the European level as far as refugees assistance is concerned. In fact, it enables refugees to safely and legally enter the Italian territory with a humanitarian visa and the possibility of consequently lodging an application for asylum. This practice has recently been reconfirmed and approved also by the Protocol for the Creation of Humanitarian Corridors and for the Evacuation of Migrants from Afghanistan, which was signed by the Italian Minister of Foreign and Domestic Affairs, by the Italian Episcopal Conferences, by UNHCR, by Caritas, by the Federation of Evangelical Churches, by Comunità Sant'Egidio, and so on. To conclude, I really hope that the project of humanitarian corridors will be increasingly implemented and strengthened in an ever wider area inside a new asylum system, for example, in Europe and also in other countries of the world, to ensure a safe future and to restore dignity to vulnerable people.
Next we'll have Sir Yvonne Bambara from the Congregation of the Sisters of Our Lady of Charity, the Good Shepherd, here with us on the panel. And she'll be reading a section of the call to action in French. So we don't have that translation here in the halls, but you can follow along with the text you picked up at the entrance. She'll be followed by a video message from Professor Azat Karam, the Secretary General of Religions for Peace. And she will highlight the crucial role of interreligious collaboration. But first, Sister Yvonne, who is Talitha Kum's coordinator for Africa.
Thank you. Autonomiser les femmes et les filles, ainsi que leurs familles et les communautés.
Empowering women and girls as well as their families and communities. Talitha Kum is determined to counteract the power differential between men and women in all sectors: economic, social, familial, political, cultural, and religious. As a key factor contributing to the objectification and denigration of women and the subsequent culture of violence, one of the heinous expressions of which is human trafficking for sexual exploitation, labor exploitation, and other forms of exploitation. To this end, Talitha Kum calls in particular on global governance stakeholders for measures to improve awareness of and promote actions to eliminate gender power imbalances, taking into account intersections between gender and other social categories, such as ethnic origin, social status, and disability, as well as the cumulative effects produced by multiple forms of discrimination. Ensure equal access to quality education, vocational training, and job opportunities for girls and women, particularly for survivors of human trafficking and those at risk of being trafficked. Provide for equal labor rights for women, particularly in female-dominated sectors more prone to exploitation, such as domestic and care work, agriculture, food processing and packaging, tourism, and hospitality. This process of autonomy for women and girls is crucial for Talitha Kum Africa, and in order it to be effective, it needs to be coupled with effective actions. We try to put into practice formation and vocational training activities for the victims of human trafficking, in order these people to be recognized in their dignity. Thank you very much.
Greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum, as we say in my religious tradition. It is a great honor for me and a privilege to be able to address you here on this very critical theme of human trafficking, and particularly on the theme of empowering women and girls. Traditionally, I'm not necessarily in favor of empowering. I am very much keen on ensuring that we can work together and build capacities and ensure that we have safe spaces and are able to actually hold accountable our leaders, political, civil, religious, of any ilk and type. Because I serve as the Secretary General of Religions for Peace, I have the honor of being able to serve religious leaders and representatives of religious institutions and faith communities worldwide. One of the lessons that is quickly becoming very transparent is the issue of the challenge of getting faith leaders and religious institutions to collaborate, to work together. There is no question in anyone's mind on the issue of human trafficking that some of the most violent victims, those who have suffered most, those continue to suffer most, are women and girls. Not because no one else does, but because this is an absolutely critical category. We are deeply grateful and deeply humbled by the work of Talitha Kum. I have yet to see more engaged, committed, infused, selfless service in this space than what I have witnessed and observed about Talitha Kum. And I wish to, if I was wearing a hat, take it off, doff it, and be able to say, thank you for the services that you do, Talitha Kum. They are very much needed. My job here is to be able to speak to you about how important it is to address those who impact most on our behaviors, on the ways we think, on how we behave, and on what we believe. Those are in the most everywhere in the world. They tend to be faith leaders. Religious institutions may have lost some audience in Western Europe, but they continue to be the most powerful agents of social transformation in the world today. There is no way that we can think of trying to enable girls and women to be active partners in the story of their recovery from victimhood in these most dire, most atrocious of situations. We cannot consider this without the engagement of religious institutions. Talitha Kum is grounded in a very, very spiritual and activist Christian spirit. I would like to insist that we must make sure that it is a multi-religious institution and spiritual grounding that needs to take place. Christian leaders, even if every single one of them was to be absolutely mobilized to serve the causes that Talitha Kum causes, which is to ensure that no girl and no woman should ever be a victim of any form of human trafficking, even if every single Christian church in the world was mobilized to work for this, it would still not be enough. We absolutely must engage multi-religiously, such that every faith representative, every religious institution, every faith community is at the very least informed and at best empowered to work together, enabled to work together, to be conscious of what it is that is taking place, of the harm that is taking place, and to zero in on the specific well-being, the specific needs, the specific lessons learned of enabling women and girls not only to survive, but to thrive. Because it is not sufficient to stop the practice. It is not sufficient to be able to say we have halted human trafficking worldwide. We will have on our hands tremendously hurt populations. These two must be served. These two must be healed. And we cannot do it as one religion alone, just like we cannot do it as one civil society organization alone. I therefore urge you to think multi-religiously, collaboratively, to serve this community, and we stand ready in Religions for Peace to support in any way that we can. May God bless you for the efforts you are undertaking. May God bless Talitha Kum's efforts too.
Next, we have Sister Maria Luisa Puglisi. She's a member of the Handmaids of the Blessed Sacrament in Charity, and she will be followed by a written reflection from Lawrence Hart, who's director of the International Organization for Migration for Italy and a representative to the Holy See. His message will be read to us today by Sandra Paola Alvarez, who is here. She's a representative from the International Organization for Migration. But first, Sister Maria Luisa, who is Talitha Kum's coordinator for Europe. The floor is yours.
Sostenere percorsi di migrazione sicuri e legali.
Supporting safe legal migration pathways, including in cases of forced displacement. Thalita Kum recognizes that legal migration pathways have shrunk globally, including in cases of forced displacement, reducing the possibility for individuals to travel through safe channels. To those who escape from protracted conflicts, poverty, instability, disasters, lack of socioeconomic chances, and human rights violations, it is prevented from accessing opportunities for human security and human development. This approach, often paired with political rhetoric fomenting hate, racism, and xenophobia, hinders the safety, dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms of migrants, asylum seekers, and refugees, including victims of trafficking and other vulnerable groups. To promote effective legal migration pathways, Thalita Kum calls in particular on global governance stakeholders for measures and for the early identification of situations of exploitation suffered by migrants, including asylum seekers, refugees, and displaced persons, for the promotion of awareness-raising activities aimed at portraying the risks of abuse, violence, and exploitation along pathways and in destination countries, for the establishment of safe legal pathways for migration with special attention to women and girls, including in situations of forced displacement, for the fair recruitment and treatment of migrant workers in the labor market, regardless of their legal status, and with special attention to women and girls. In doing so, Thalita Kum supports Pope Francis' invitation to welcome, protect, promote, and integrate migrants, refugees, and internally displaced people in order to prevent them from falling into the hands of human trafficking. What we just shared mirrors the current situation of women and girls in many countries, as well as the reality of many parts of Europe and the world. Human trafficking, how can we prevent it from happening? Together, we can promote safety, freedom, and autonomy of people.
Buonasera. Good afternoon. I have the privilege to speak on behalf of Mr. Lawrence Hart, representative to the Holy See of the International Organization for Migration, and convey his message and his apologies because he could not join us today. IOM has been working to counter trafficking in persons since 1994, assisting over 100,000 victims of trafficking globally, providing comprehensive direct assistance packages to victims of trafficking in collaboration with our partners, among which I can proudly mention IOM's long-standing collaboration with Thalita Kum. Thank you. It is a privilege for us to be here. IOM collaborates closely with governmental institutions, NGOs, civil society, and international organizations under the 3P paradigm of prosecution, protection, and prevention, established by the 2010 United Nations Global Plan of Action to Combat Trafficking in Persons, and relying on 3 principles that govern all our counter-trafficking activities: respect for human rights, the physical, mental, and social well-being of the individual and the communities, and sustainability. Like the voices of the network that we just heard, IOM believes that this phenomenon can only be tackled from a whole of government and whole of society approach, building solid multi-stakeholder partnerships, focusing on prevention through awareness raising, technical cooperation, enhancing the capacities of government, civil society, and frontline professionals, and supporting victim-centered identification, referral, and assistance, but also building evidence for informed policymaking. IOM has developed the largest global database with primary data on victims of trafficking, the IOM Global Human Trafficking Database, which feeds the information featured in the Counter-Trafficking Data Collaborative. IOM fully supports and is proud to support Talitha Kum's call to action and the ambition to eradicate human trafficking and exploitation. In particular, IOM supports and would like to advocate jointly with the Talitha Kum for more safe and legal migration pathways, including cases of forced displacement. This is in line with the Global Compact on Migration specific objectives. Objective 10, to prevent, combat, and eradicate trafficking in persons in the context of international migration. Objective 23, strengthen international cooperation and global partnerships for safe, orderly, and regular migration. Objective 5, enhance the availability and flexibility of pathways for regular migration. Objective 6, facilitate fair and ethical recruitment and safeguard conditions that ensure decent work. Objective 2, minimize the adverse drivers and structural factors that compel people to leave their country of origin. Regular pathways are at the core of the efforts to eradicate human trafficking. Without time-bound, predictable, safe, regular migration channels, traffickers continue to exploit migrants and their families' vulnerabilities, even more so in context of crisis. Again, IOM likes to join the voices of Talitha Kum and advocate for resettlement and complementary pathways. Ambassador Sebastiani also mentioned the corridor, the humanitarian corridors that IOM is supporting from Afghanistan and neighboring countries. Regular migration channels at all skill levels and ethical recruitment, engaging more with the private sector to sensitize and minimize abusive situations, monitor supply chains, and enhance protection. Regular migration avenues for family reunification, students, entrepreneurs, pre-departure orientation and protection throughout the migration cycle, addressing the perceptions that are negative and fostering integration and social cohesion, mainstream gender and child-sensitive approaches throughout all measures. This is how IOM's action is aligned also with a call to welcome, protect, promote, and integrate migrants, refugees, and internally displaced persons. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Alvarez. And finally, we'll hear from Sister Carmen Ugarte Garcia, who's here with us on the panel. And she will be followed by Sister Angela Reed of the Religious Sisters of Mercy, who is a UN advocate and head of Mercy International. She'll be joining us live on Zoom. But for Sister Carmen, she is Talitha Kum's coordinator for Latin America.
Promover una economía del cuidado.
Promoting an economy of care and solidarity. Talitha Kum embraces Pope Francis' message for the 7th International Day of Prayer and Awareness Against Human Trafficking on February the 8th of this year, 2021. An economy without human trafficking is an economy of care. Care can be understood as taking care of people and nature, offering products and services for the growth of the common good. An economy that cares for work, creating employment opportunities that do not exploit workers through degrading working conditions and grueling hours. In doing so, Talitha Kum recognizes that increasing socioeconomic disparities provide fertile grounds for human trafficking to flourish. And this is the reason why it strives towards a long-term systemic transformation from an economy of trafficking to an economy of care and solidarity. The latter shall also favor a sustainable and integral development in light of the environmental crisis which affects our common home, the Earth. Therefore, the network calls, in particular, linked to my memories of great pain, but also hope, that the pandemic actually worsened the global situation. For example, in the Caribbean and in Latin America, it worsened disparities and violence, above all against women and girls who were already being exploited sexually. It worsened the situation of job exploitation, bringing families to live in an unbearable situations. It also brought internally displaced people moving towards better life conditions, which not always are possible. And this is the reason why Chalita is called and calls in particular on global governance stakeholders to actually favor ethical and responsible business and consumption models that are based on value chains unrelated to human trafficking and exploitations, and that promote human dignity and environmental sustainability, including action aimed at tackling climate change, favoring the socioeconomic integration and inclusion of survivors of human trafficking and individuals at risk, promoting policies of care implies considering ourselves as brothers and sisters, and this is really cooperation.
And my special congratulations to all at Talitha Kum for the launch of Talitha Kum's call to action. I know the process of formulating this comprehensive call to action has been an extensive one. In preparing it, you've drawn upon the experience, insights, and recommendations of survivors, as well as the wisdom of Talitha Kum members working directly with those impacted by human trafficking. It's an honour and a privilege to have the opportunity this afternoon to provide some reflection on the importance of promoting an economy of care and solidarity in order to work towards the eradication of human trafficking and exploitation. I'd like to begin by sharing with you the story of Katrina, who experienced being trafficked for the purpose of sexual exploitation when she was a minor. I met Katrina in Cebu, Philippines, a number of years ago while I was seeking to understand better the phenomenon of human trafficking. Katrina shared, "My name is Katrina. When I was 2, my mother and father left us in the care of our elder brother, who was 12 at that time. They went to Cebu for work, an island far away from where we lived. My parents would send money to my elder brother for all our needs, but there was never enough food. I can only remember maybe twice or 3 times that my mother came home. I helped my brother in taking care of other siblings. My elder sister would only tell me what to do, but it was me who did the household chores. When I was 7, my father decided that the whole family would go to Cebu City. In the city, we had no house. We just stayed in the pier area and around the market. At night time, we slept along the fish section until the fish vendors arrived at 4 a.m. We then moved under the big vans nearby to finish our sleep. We had no permanent place, and I thought it was better back in our province because we had a little hut by ourselves. I did many odd jobs while in the market in order to survive. One job was washing carrots for the vegetable vendors. I had to wash carrots during the night so that by early morning, they would be ready for the consumers. For every kilo of washed carrots, I got 1 peso. We also got some money from my father's work as a butcher and for running errands for other vendors. It would have been sufficient to feed the family, but my father was hooked on drugs and alcohol, and he spent all the money on this. Although I did not go to school much, I attended as much as I could and tried to pay for my own tuition. I am educated to grade 8. From 7 until 13 years old, I lived in the pier and market with very little adult supervision. There was a time that I lived in the house of my aunt who had a little baby. She hired a male babysitter, and this babysitter abused me sexually from the age of 8 until I was 12. Nobody knew about this because the babysitter threatened me in order to keep it a secret. I was filled with shame, and to avoid any rumours about me, I ran away. I went to the big city of Manila and became a domestic helper. It was here that I experienced much abuse, and after running away from this work, I was trafficked for the purpose of sexual exploitation. It's only now with the help of support services that I have returned to Cebu. Katrina's story gives insight into the experience of human trafficking and significantly provides a window into the many factors that render young women and girls vulnerable to trafficking. Let's take some time to break down the elements of Katrina's story. First, Katrina experienced the separation from her parents at a very young age, being left in the care of her older brother who was 12. Her parents moved to Cebu City to work so that they could send money home to feed their 6 children. It makes me wonder what kind of dilemma and circumstances her parents must have faced to have had to leave behind her children. Second, Katrina undertook responsibility for essential household chores and caretaking of her younger siblings when she was 7 years old. Again, I ask, why is a child rendered responsible for such tasks at such a young age? Third, the whole family, mum, dad, and 6 children, migrated to Cebu City from their rural environment and became part of what we call the urban poor. They had no housing, no safe shelter, just slept at the pier, often without their parents. Again, one wonders what the conditions and circumstances were like in the rural area that forced her parents to make such a risky decision to move to the city. Fourth, from the age of 7, Katrina slept at the pier, seeking food and money in order to survive. She earned 1 measly peso for peeling a kilo of carrots in the marketplace. I ask, what kind of circumstances lead to such exploitation of a minor? Who was really benefiting from this child labour? Fifth, Katrina was largely uneducated but highly motivated, even seeking to pay for her own tuition fees. She was only able to make grade 8. And again, I ask, what kind of global system neglects the right for all children everywhere to be educated? 6, when Katrina at 13 finally had access to housing and shelter at her auntie's house, she was raped by her babysitter. This indicates that whilst moving to unsafe conditions at the pier, she found herself even unsafer in a home environment. Not only was she unsafe, but she was threatened to remain silent. And her shame led her then to escape to Manila, where she gained work as a domestic worker, but once again was exploited in that role and further trafficked for the purpose of sexual exploitation. Clearly, from early childhood into early adulthood, Katrina experienced poverty, lack of safe housing and shelter, lack of education, abandonment, insecurity, exploitation of work, sexual violence, and deception. Sadly, Katrina's story is one of many stories of abuse and neglect told by women and young girls who have experienced human trafficking. This is an unacceptable reality and one that we must strive to change. It's not fate or bad luck that led to Katrina's exploitation. She was let down by a social, economic and political system that does not value the care and safety of children. A system that does not prioritise human security and well-being. A system that condones the denigration of others through sexual exploitation and other demeaning acts. How can we make Katrina's story and the story of so many trafficking survivors part of history, no longer existing? Talitha Kum's call to action has at its heart the core objectives of care, healing, empowerment and restoration. Core to attaining this is engaging in promoting an economy of care and solidarity. In such an economy, trafficking trajectories like Katrina's would be non-existent over the life course. Her vulnerability would be significantly reduced. Why? Because an economy of care promotes the well-being of people and the planet. It puts people and planet over and above profit. It turns neoliberalism on its head, seeking the flourishing of all, as opposed to rapid growth at any cost. An economy of care enables people to make choices about their lives according to their gifts and talents. And it has at the heart of its plan the inherent dignity of each and every person, offering services and products for the growth of the common good. An economy of care does not discriminate. It prioritises the needs of its citizens over economic prosperity and neoliberal capitalist forces. The call is to create a positive spiral of policies that create a healthy economy, society and environment, whereby not just a few elite benefit, but where all have the opportunity to flourish and where earth and human rights are realised. In a world where solidarity with one another reigns, sweatshop labour, debt bondage, forced marriage, organ removal, exploitation in the fishing and agricultural industries, and sexual exploitation will be non-existent. Katrina's story was experienced in this century. If we continue to fail to invest in the health and safety of children now, the lifetime impacts on their educational attainment, their workplace productivity and security will affect future well-being. The measure of our success will be in listening to the stories of those who have experienced firsthand human trafficking. Stories that lead us to question the systems that continue to perpetuate injustice, systems that further oppress those rendered poor. As sisters, as Catholics, as religious leaders, as non-believers, as allies, as people of goodwill who share a vision of a world free from human trafficking and exploitation, we must continue to be advocates for an alternative economic, social and political system. We have some useful agendas to keep us on track. Of course, Pope Francis's encyclical letters, Laudate Si and Fratelli Tutti, the UN Charter of Human Rights, the Sustainable Development Goals, which call for no one to be left behind. And of course, the gospel. As people of the gospel, we have a responsibility toward each other and toward the world. We can indeed be people of hope and pray for a world where we can all live freely from oppression. Talitha Kum is flying the flag for a new world order, a courageous call to global solidarity, one in which we are all valued, in which no one will be hungry, fearful and neglected. In this world, earth and peoples can flourish in a truly non-exploitative environment. Congratulations, Talitha Kum, on taking this important step.
Well, I'd like to thank all the speakers who joined us today. You've shared so much of your experience and insight and really tireless commitment for accompanying so many survivors. I'd like to also thank everyone who came today, who is also following online. Hopefully people have been inspired by the sisters' call, by this invitation to support their call and to share it. I think this is a call that needs to be taken seriously. These sisters are on the ground. They're seeing with their own eyes what the problems are, and their recommendations are valid. You can find this important document online. It's at talithakum.info. And as today's speakers have made clear, greater multilateral action is needed and everyone can play a role. Now, we'd like to end today's launch with final closing remarks by Loreto sister Pat Murray. She's Executive Secretary of the International Union of Superiors General.
You'll be glad to know that these are a few closing remarks. You have been very attentive and I'm sure, like me, you've been touched by things you've heard and seen. And I suggest that you allow those words and images to nourish you in the days ahead, because I think each of us has to answer at a personal level, but also within our organizations, have to say, what is that calling me to? What is that calling us to today? So it's my pleasure to thank the Talitha Kum Network, the Coordination Committee, members of whom are here, others who were not able to travel and who have joined us online, the sisters who participated in making the video, and everyone, sisters and experts and friends who participated in creating the call to action. I want to thank the organizations, all of you that have supported the call to action, and particularly this launch. We're particularly grateful to the Secretariat of State, to you, Cardinal Parolin, to the Italian Embassy, to the Holy See, the International Organization for Migration, Religions for Peace, and Mercy International. But an event like this is the culmination of months of collaboration between Talitha Kum and the UISG's new advocacy project, Sisters Advocating Globally. We're very grateful to the Global Solidarity Fund for supporting us to launch this project in July 2020, and for empowering UISG's initiatives like Talitha Kum and others to continue their journey towards an ever more impactful advocacy, which we believe is part of the prophetic nature of religious life. I've been here in Rome a long time. I was actually at the beginning of the journey of Talitha Kum. I was present in December 1998 when Sister Leah Ackerman of the Missionary Sisters of Our Lady of Africa spoke about human trafficking at a public meeting. Margaret Wheatley tells us that change often begins with a single conversation. And that single conversation on that day in December 1998 gave birth to more conversations that eventually issued in the creation of Talitha Kum. So what are the conversations that you have to have now so that you bring the message of the call to action further in your communities, in your organizations? And I ask you to look at the symbol of the hand that is open, but also the hand that is upright, the hand that calls us to care, to heal, to empower, and to restore. So for each of us, what does that hand mean? How will you care, heal, empower, and restore? Through your actions, through your organizations, through your reflection, and through your awareness raising. So we're beginning a journey, and we're beginning that journey together with everybody here in this room, with your networks, your connections, your partners, and with all people of different faiths, of no faith, all men and women of goodwill, who are committed to ending the scourge of human trafficking. We believe, as people of hope, that together we can seize this opportunity to find strength in partnership and collaboration, and to join our forces together in our different parts of the world to work together to bear witness. We are addressing one of the world's most pressing and most global challenges. I'd like to thank Ms. Carol Glass for her moderating today. She's led us so beautifully through each of the steps and each aspect of the program. So I think our call is to be people of hope who take the next steps on this journey. And as Pope Francis says to us often as sisters, andiamo con coraggio. So thank you very much. And just to say, there are refreshments to the right as you exit the hall. And thank you for being with us today. Grazie mille.